All right, so you see here, this I have here, this is a cell phone. And if you were to go back about, I don't know, like 40 years, almost 40 years from now, and some person on the street, you show them this device and you told them that you're able to talk to people on this is a phone. There's like no wires, and they would never believe you. It's possible that people like you may be able to have a phone that have no wires. And you would tell this person, like, you know, not only can you talk to other people without these wires, you could be able to watch movies on this phone. You could be able to watch TV shows, read books, listen to music, and play video games. And they would look at you and they would never believe that you could do all of this inside this piece of technology. Because, you know, back in those days, if you wanted to do something like play video games, you would have to do the same thing that everyone else went. Like, the same place everywhere all these people went to was to the local arcade. Now, if you were out in the East End, you know, Scarborough, they had an arcade there at Scarborough Town Center. If you were downtown, if you were sitting at U of T or Ryerson, or you're like loitering at Eaton Center, you could walk up to Funland. And if you were out in the west side, Sherway Gardens, you had like 2 arcades at some point. And that was my first time that I remember going to an arcade. I was like a really young kid. And I remember the glowing lights of the arcade, the CRT monitors that were bright, just kind of sucking you in. The sounds of computer-generated music, you know, blasting, trying to, you know, this kid just kind of gravitate towards that. And as I walked into this place, this magical place, and what it made you want to do is you would dig into your pocket and you would pull out a $1 bill. You know, back in those days, we didn't have any loonies, we had a dollar bill. And you would take this dollar bill and you would give it to the human coin exchanger and say, "Hey sir, can you give me some change?" And you're like, "Oh, give you the 4 quarters." Take the 4 quarters, you know, put it in your pocket, you run to the machine, hopefully no one's there yet, and you take this quarter and you put it into the machine. And you press the start button, you grab the joystick with your left hand, and you know, your right hand, you would hit the buttons. There's like no instructions. And I remember that moment that I was going to be hooked on video games.
Sorry, what science fiction movie was that?
There's too many. So, you know, from that time, from the 1980s until present day, consumer technology has become more and more powerful. And as it becomes more and more powerful, this idea of going to the centralized location to play video games, this idea of the arcade, has pretty much gone into extinction. Nowadays, if you want to play any kind of games, you're going to be playing it at the comfort of your home, and you're probably playing with a gamepad. In 2008, Street Fighter 4 was released. And for those of us who played Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3 in the arcade, we really wanted to have that arcade experience, to have that joystick and have those buttons and to be able to pull those combos and whatnot from the comfort of being at a home. So what companies did was they created this accessory with the same arcade joystick and the buttons, and it was called a fight stick, and basically was the joystick and the buttons in a box, and you would put it on your lap. And when they first came out, they were all pretty plain, they were all the same. If you wanted to customize it, you can get different kinds of buttons, different colors, different types of joystick accessories. If you wanted to change the look of it, you can have custom artwork printed, and you can overlay that on top. For me as a programmer, and I saw this, I didn't want to do something like that, something static. I wanted to do something dynamic. I wanted to be able to program the artwork that would go into, you know, my joystick as an expression of myself. So the first thing I did was, my first pass at this idea was to get an LCD monitor and drill holes in it, one for the joystick and one for each of the buttons. And then I would hook that up to a laptop. And the idea was that I'd be able to change, you know, the artwork as easily as you would change your desktop wallpaper. And then as more and more research I did into trying to drill holes into an LCD monitor, I learned this was a very bad idea. You shouldn't do that. So then went back to the drawing board and I came up with a compromise. Instead of having 1080p graphics, I ended up having these LED strips. I had 20 pixels in one strip and about 8 rows of them. So for a total of about 160 pixels. And in order to control these 160 pixels, I got myself an Arduino starter kit, and I didn't know anything about electronics. I never took it in high school. I ended up watching a lot of YouTube videos and reading a lot of articles. I got myself like a really good entry-level book on electronics. And the more I got into electronics, the more you understand it, you get more excited, you have so many questions of what's possible that's out there. And so I was very lucky that where I worked at, the colleagues that I worked with, they actually have an education in electrical engineering. And they were more than happy to answer my stupid questions. So as I was trying to get more into Arduino and C during my free time, this was about a year, I did this for about a year and a half or 2 years, whatever free time I had. I got myself into this roadblock in the project where I couldn't go any further. I mean, learning C, if you have to do anything with Arduino, you have to learn C, is incredibly frustrating for a Java programmer like myself. So in Java, we take for granted the most basic of things like arrays and garbage collection, and when you do it in C, it's you have to be a lot more defensive. So I was trying to get more understanding, learn how C and electronics would work, and I got myself into this roadblock where I couldn't go any further, and I took a break from the project. And it wasn't until about a year ago, around this time, I discovered a Raspberry Pi. And for 60 bucks, oh my God, this credit card-sized computer is able to do so much with it. And the best part about a Raspberry Pi was that you could program it in Python. And Python is a lot more accessible language than C is. So I got more involved with learning how to program with Python on this Raspberry Pi computer, and I was lucky to find out that there's so many different open source libraries out there, and I was lucky to find this one library that was able to do exactly what I wanted to do with these LED strips. And so this library is called BiblioPixel. It's open source, and if it wasn't for that open source library, none of this would have been possible. So BiblioPixel library, also the Raspberry Pi, and power supply is what's driving this visual that you're seeing here right now. Now the input with the joysticks and the buttons, they're independent of that. They're hooked up to a different type of circuit board called a Brook PCB. And how that works is that anytime that you press one of these buttons, or you push any one of these directions, what it does is it activates one of these micro switches over here. And when that happens, the circuit board will detect this particular switch being activated. It will then send a signal from the circuit board, the Brook PCB, and send it to a PlayStation 4 or PC, whatever it is, and it will interpret that as a game input event. So the input, the joystick with the buttons, is independent of the lighting. I designed it that way so that if I'm in a situation where I don't have access to power, I'd still be able to use the joystick as it is. So why is this like new tech cross old tech? Well, taking this, we live in an age where we have like motion controllers and game pads. So it's a throwback to back in the days from the arcade where we'd have joysticks and buttons. And I tried to reinvent it using the technology that we have available today with these energy efficient LED strips. And this credit card sized computer, the Raspberry Pi, which is incredibly powerful. And hooked it up to this power supply that's actually behind here. It's pretty relatively small, lightweight, but the idea of having a power supply and a joystick is completely unheard of. And also, in terms of new tech that's involved with this, is that instead of having a PlayStation 4 and having it all hacked up, trying to wire it, there's this tiny little circuit board that's taking care of all of that. Okay, so still on the topic of arcades, if you ever went to an arcade, not only would you find like these arcade machines, you would also find pinball machines. And pinball machines, if you've ever played them, they're about 7 feet tall, they're about 5 feet deep, they're about 200 pounds, a lot of lights, a lot of switches, a lot of wiring goes into it. As a result, there's a lot of man hours that go into building a pinball machine. And it becomes very expensive if you ever try to buy one. They go anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000. Take, for example, a Game of Thrones pinball machine goes for about $11,000 Canadian. So if if you're a pinball enthusiast and you may not have, you know, you might not be able to host a real pinball machine because it's so big and so heavy, or you may not have the resources to actually cough up $5,000, $12,000 to buy one. What the community has done is that you can buy what's called a virtual pinball system. But I use these words, virtual pinball, as a definition from like maybe 2016, 2015, and before that. So what's meant for a virtual pinball system is that you would have a 24-inch monitor laid out in portrait, and then you'd have another monitor as the back box, and then they would have buttons on the left and they have buttons on the right. And the benefit of this system is it's not as big. It's actually a lot more accessible in terms of price. And you can actually play, you know, not just one pinball game, but you can play like many. You can have like 20 or 50 different pinball games. Versus a real pinball machine, which actually has only one game. Now, the drawback of this type of virtual pinball is that it's flat. It's a 2D screen. So me being like a novice virtual reality developer, trying to learn Unreal Engine, I needed kind of like an idea of how can I learn this technology? I need a project to kind of learn how to do this stuff. So I took this old game of pinball, and what I did was I did a lot of research in terms of like what goes into pinball, and I was lucky to find this open source software called Visual Pinball, which helped me identify what are the different components that go into designing a pinball layout. And from that, I use this program called SketchUp, and I don't know if you guys ever use SketchUp, but SketchUp is this free software that's really great. It's really, I don't have nothing but praise for it. It's if you ever wanted to do any type of 3D modeling, it's a very low barrier of entry to get into, and you know, if you do 1 hour in stuff, you can do so much. Not just this stuff right here, but also like 3D modeling, or sorry, 3D printing. If you want to do furniture design, or if you wanted to plan out the layout of a room without actually lifting anything, you can do that in this computer-aided design software. So in SketchUp, I was able to get the components that I researched, and I tried to create each one, designed it in SketchUp. I exported it then into Blender using a special plugin. And Blender is this other free software that, in my case, what I use is to adjust the components to scale them to what you would find in a real pinball machine. And then from there, I ended up exporting those assets into the FBX file format, which is what's preferred to import into Unreal Engine. So from Unreal Engine, I imported those assets in, and I was able to lay them all out. And once I had it look like the way I wanted to, I need to add some logic to it. And so you have this visual programming language called blueprints, and it's basically like nodes. If you think of like a table where things are just spread out, and you could hook up all the nodes with wires. And this is like one of the easiest ways if you're trying to get into Unreal Engine, how to learn how to use the software. It's as hard as probably doing something like HTML. If you want to do something like how JavaScript gives you more power in the browser, Unreal Engine allows you to program in C++ and give you that granular control. But for my purposes, for my project, I just did everything in blueprints. So, where am I? So that's how I did the software portion of it. And like I said, I was trying to learn virtual reality, and how can I do this project using something like the Oculus Rift that I have here, kind of like hooked up. So from that point, I wanted to be able to extend this experience of something virtual. That with the case of the virtual reality from a virtual pinball machine from before, where it's 2D and flat, with an Oculus Rift, you can be able to see a sense of depth, to be able to look at the different angles, how the ball hits. And to extend that experience, what I wanted to do was create a physical interface where you actually can touch something. It's one thing to see that you're not here anymore, but it's another thing to actually have something in the real world that's actually stimulating your fingertips to kind of fake that you're actually not in this room but somewhere else. And so how about I went to go do that. I had this piece of wood that was in the garage, and ended up cutting it up so many different ways there, and I drilled some holes. And I got some arcade buttons here. One for the left flipper, one for the right flipper. Another button here for spotting a ball, and this ball launch right here, that when the ball's in the lane, that will actually shoot the ball down the lane line. And so how this works is that if you press any of these buttons, again, you're activating a micro switch that's hooked up to a circuit board. The circuit board that's here, it's called the Cthulhu circuit board. It's actually a much older circuit board that was used to modify Xbox One controllers and make them work for PS3. And I kind of repurposed it so that it would work for something other than a joystick. And so as these switches get activated, the Cthulhu circuit board will recognize which of these buttons or sensors is triggered. It will then send a signal over the USB-B wire, in this case to Windows, where it gets interpreted as a game input event. And in my project, the Unreal Engine project, I'm monitoring for these specific types of game input events. And in the game itself, once it detects these events from occurring, there's a virtual flipper where I apply a rotation on the flipper. And on the flipper itself, there is a collision mesh. When the ball impacts the collision mesh, what it does is just repels the ball as if you would in the real world. And then you're seeing all of this with the head-mounted display. So why is this new tech cross old tech? Well, taking this game from the 1950s, that before then they didn't have any electricity, it was all mechanical, and it wasn't until the 70s they introduced circuitry into it. And I try to reinvent it with modern day technology that we have with the Oculus Rift, doing the visuals, and you don't even have the footprint of a 7-foot tall machine and a 5-foot deep, 200-pound piece of electronic in your house. And also using probably one of the biggest one of two types of software that is being used to create VR, Unreal Engine. And also repurposing this controller circuit board and trying to create that pinball-like experience. So to wrap up, the reason why I wanted to do this talk was that if you're in the business of creating interfaces like myself, I wanted to kind of offer a different type of interface where it's not your typical keyboard and mouse interaction, or it's not your typical on your 1080p or 4K monitor. When I started this Fight Stick project, I didn't know anything about electronics. And when I started, I was terrified that I was going to electrocute myself, or that I would hook it up to a PlayStation 4 and I would have fried up whoever PlayStation 4 was that, or if I hooked it up to a computer or to a laptop or to a PC, that I would fry the motherboard and kind of get screwed over like that. And when I gotten to start this project with pinball, virtual reality, my day job, I'm not in the business of creating AAA game titles as a mobile developer. I just had to learn the hard way, going through all this material, because there's not really anyone trying to teach me any of this stuff. So these two areas of electronics and virtual reality, these are huge unknowns for myself. And what I did was I looked inside, and I took inventory of what I did know, and I looked at my experiences, my childhood experiences, growing up playing video games and pinball here and there. So I took this knowledge of what I already did know, and I used that as a vehicle to enter these areas of knowledge that I knew nothing about. And it's been quite the journey that I'm here sharing with you guys tonight. So this is the end of the talk, and afterwards what I'm going to do is we're going to try to hook up this to, I think I got my laptop here. If you guys are interested, you can, more than happy, this is not to just look at, you can actually play and try it out. I'd love to hear your feedback. I also got one of my earlier projects here that does pretty much the same thing without the lights. Also, I'm going to try to get this to work with these screens. We've run into some major technical difficulties. I think we'll be able to play pinball, this virtual pinball project, but without the virtual reality stuff, the internet with my desktop. So I'd like to thank DevTO for inviting me here to speak. And if this is your first time tonight here at DevTO, do not be shy. Don't hesitate to introduce yourself. You're going to meet a lot of cool people here tonight. And thank you guys for listening. Any questions at all? Or? Yeah.
So on your ball launcher, do you have excursion detection on the amount of rainfall?
Well, I just kind of cheaped out on it. It's really just, there's a massive washer, and what happens is the washer comes in contact with a switch that has a long arm. That is going to fire off an on-press event. Okay. So there is no, it's not that you can figure out that this is at 50%, 75%, 82%, 0.2, whatever it is. It's just on and off.
That'll be the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's like so much. I mean, it was doing the hardware and then also doing the software. It's been quite a juggle, going back and forth, learning electronics, and then learning something like Unreal Engine is pretty big. So, yeah.
What's the starting point? Like, I love what you did with the LED lights. Kind of, what's the starting point if you're starting with LED lights and Raspberry Pi? How would you recommend one begins? I
went the long route with Arduino. The Arduino stuff did not work out because I had some really, I mean, this looks pretty basic, but this is not so basic when you're trying to program from scratch in C. So the Arduino route, I was able to understand the fundamental stuff like Ohm's law and Kirchhoff's law and all these fundamental electronic stuff. But in the end, it didn't really work out with this. I ended up throwing that Arduino into this desktop right here that's powering these lights. So I would say if you're trying to get into, it is a flex capacitor.
Shush, you're gonna spoil it.
I don't know. This is how I travel into time and I come and tell you stories about the arcade.
You had to ruin it.
Yeah. If you're really trying to get into the beginning, like I don't know how low you want to go, but there are kits designed for 5-year-olds. Then you can learn the basics from there, and then maybe you might get tired of it because it's so easy to do. And then, Arduino is a really low barrier of entry, but if anyone who has any experience working with Arduino, you eventually get to a point where you can't go any further with it, or it's just going to be too much time or too much effort. And so in which case you would jump to something like a Raspberry Pi. And the Raspberry Pi, if you haven't tried it out, is like a laptop. It's got its own HDMI port, it's got USB ports so that you can hook up a keyboard and mouse. That you will not find in Arduino. Arduino is, it's great for turning on and off things, you could program that, or it could read whatever sensor it is. And then it's up to you to throw it to something like a real computer, like a desktop computer or laptop, to interpret that data. A Raspberry Pi can do all of that in this tiny credit card sized computer. Anything else? Oh, that's okay. Anyways, if you guys have a chance, on the meetup page, the second trailer for this talk is on there. And I don't know if you've seen it already, but when you have the time, it's only about a minute, but it actually just kind of jumps to quick shots of me working in Unreal Engine and doing blueprints and putting this thing together. But yeah, more than happy to come on down and try it out for yourself.